This is Earthfiles, the award-winning news site with the latest updates in science, environment, and real X-Files. Podcasting in-depth reports beyond the 6 o'clock news by Emmy Award-winning journalist Linda Moulton Howe.
Recently, I received the following email response to my Earthfiles.com, Dreamland, and Coast to Coast AM requests from viewers and listeners who might have more information about the highly strange dragonfly-shaped and moving drones. Here is an excerpt from a May 30th, 2008 email. Quote, I just heard your piece about dragonfly probes, and you talked about people sitting on their stories about contacts and encounters for fear of being ridiculed and chastised for their comments. Well, that's what I've been doing for about 7 years. In 2001, I was on my parents' land in southern Ohio, about an hour north of Cincinnati. It was early morning, about 8:30 a.m. in mid-December 2001. I had been out hunting on my parents' land, where there were a lot of Douglas fir trees that ran about a half mile and about 300 yards deep. The deer I was hunting came to that stand of fir trees, so I routinely went to sit among the trees every hunting season. When I entered the stand of trees to head to my normal spot, I felt a strange sensation like a static charge enveloped my body, unquote. That Ohio hunter has asked for anonymity because he now works in law enforcement and does not want to jeopardize his employment. So I will call him David Smith. David was born in 1982 and is now 26 years old. The past 4 years he has worked as a police dispatcher in a southwestern state. He told me he is haunted by what happened to him in that southern Ohio stand of fir trees in December 2001. He vividly remembers a ring with 3 long antennae suspended in the air at tree-top height. It had snowed the night before, and apparently the strange aerial ring was interested in the new snow. A perfect circle had been melted on the ground that included melting snow on fir tree branches that hung inside the circle. The snow droplets were rising in a translucent column of energy into the completely silent, hovering aerial ring with its 3 long appendages.
I walked probably 10 or 15 feet into the tree line, and I heard this sound. It's very hard to explain, but it would start from the lowest bass that the human ear can pick up, and it would rise 4 or 5, maybe even 6 octaves to a very high-pitched note, and it would do it every 15 seconds. So it would rise from bass to high pitch, and then back down to bass, and it would start the process over again. This was not natural. This was not an animal. It was not man-made. I need to find out what this is. So I started walking in the general direction that I figured it would be. And I remember that the sound never changed. The sound stayed the same volume that it was when I first heard it. Like it was the same distance away from me, even though I was walking closer. I remember looking ahead of me and seeing a tree that the snow on top of it was partially melted. It was wet snow. And the tree directly after it, the snow was a little bit more melted. It wasn't gone, but it was still kind of there. It was very wet. And then I remember the tree after it was hardly any snow at all. It was mainly on the bottom needles. And then I remember vividly the tree after it was devoid of snow and completely dry. This was the case for all of the trees that I could see in front of me on both sides of the row. I would assume it would carry forth to all the trees in a circle. I remember this being incredibly puzzling. As I walked forward to inspect the trees, I put my head down below the limb line, and I remember looking under the trees and seeing that there was a perfect circle cut in the snow, as though someone had taken a knife and just cut out a perfect circle of snow. And all that lay there was grass. So I proceeded to walk forward, and when I raised my head up between the limbs, I saw something that is very, very hard for me to explain. I saw what I assumed was the snow from this missing circle in the ground. It was floating in droplet form. It was animated. I could see movement in the droplets. I do recall seeing some sunlight played on the droplets. As I looked up the column that stretched, I would say, 5 to 8 feet up from the ground, I noticed that it got heavier as I went up. So very few droplets at the bottom. At the top of the column, there were millions of droplets, very full. And 10 feet above that, for the first time, saw the object. The sound had stopped, almost like it realized someone was there and looking at it. I just remember that the sound did stop as I walked in through the trees. After looking up past the column, seeing the object for the first time, it was very awe-inspiring at first. Very much like that small feeling you get when looking at large buildings. That was the feeling I got, was, wow, I'm incredibly puny compared to this thing. Not that it was large, because it wasn't. I would estimate the diameter of the inner ring of the object to be maybe 10, maybe 12 feet wide. There were 3 antennas. I call them antennas, but they were very thick. The ring diameter was probably a foot thick to 2 feet thick. The antenna that I saw, there were 3 of them. They were equidistant apart. They were probably 20 feet long. They were huge. Where the antenna actually met the ring, I couldn't tell any sort of coupling. I couldn't tell any sort of anchoring system. It looked like they were molded into the piece, and it all made one piece. There was absolutely no crack where they were anchored. There were no bolts, no obvious anchoring mechanisms. But they were incredibly taut. They were 100% straight. There was no bow to them.
Where were they coming off of the ring? Were they together, or were they equidistant around the ring?
They were equidistant around the ring.
Can you place in a north, south, east, west on the ring where each of these 3 20-foot-long antennae were?
I would have been pointing west. So those antennae on that ring, one would have been pointed exactly due north, and then the other 2, I would guess, were going to be pointed southwest and southeast.
And were they tapering to the very end and tip of each of those antennae?
They tapered. They came to points. They were so small and so pointy that it actually blended in with the background. To where it came to a point, I couldn't actually see the point. The material, I assume it was metal, this thing was constructed out of was nothing I've ever seen before. It was 100% smooth and very deep, as in when you would look at it, it was like it absorbed light. It was almost as though it sucked in light around itself. But it was a charcoal gray, very, very shiny, and I saw no reflections. It was shiny yet matte, if that makes any sense. I saw no reflections in it. I couldn't see myself or the surrounding trees. On the ends of the antennas, there were 4 rods that looked like FM radio antennas.
You're saying that crossing each of those ends were straight pieces of rods that made 90-degree angles to the long antenna?
Not 90, they probably made 35-degree angles. They were pointed semi-diagonally upwards. I would guess a good 3 minutes had passed, with no movement, no sound. The only thing that I can still recall vividly from this point on is that the droplets had stopped moving. They were still floating in space above this area. They are very large trees. These things are huge. And the limbs extend, they only leave a good 1.5 to 2 feet worth of clearance walking between them. So it's a big deal for that much snow to be gone.
How tall are those trees?
The object was hovering right above one, like it was almost touching one of the tips of the trees. I would say it was probably 20 to 25 feet off the ground. Those trees are about 20 to 25 feet tall.
And you are how tall?
I'm 6'4".
So the object itself was only about 14 feet above you.
Exactly. I got a very, very good look at it. The good thing is that nothing was obscured by the trees themselves. So I could see the whole ring. I could see all the antennae arrayed around its body. I vividly remember that when I would try to look at it, it would instantly, within a second or two of me looking at it directly, there would be a field around the ring that would appear that looked like heat waves. When I would first look at it, it would be just a ring. This field would just automatically appear, and it would just be waves, like heat waves coming off a hot road in the desert. The next thing I remember is looking at it and staring at the ring itself, trying to get some sort of characteristics from it, some sort of writing or inscription or anything, where there was a metal panel or something, and I just couldn't find one. I remember intently thinking to myself, what is this thing? I've got to find out what this is. And as soon as I did that, I was overcome with the most frightening fear I've ever had in my life. The most horrifying fear that you could ever imagine hit me very hard. So much so that my body tensed. I tensed up so tight that I couldn't move. It was like I'd lost control of my body. My brain was in fight or flight mode, and it was telling me to flee very quickly, but I couldn't. I was stuck in place, and this lasted for, I would say, 15 to 20 seconds. I don't know what happened to the water, the floating droplets of water. I do not know. I was very intent on the ring itself. I couldn't look away to tell what had happened to it. The next thing that I can recall happening is that as the fear progressed, as it got worse, I actually started to cry. I remember the warmth of my tears on my cold cheeks. And the last thing of the whole encounter that I really remember is the fact that it went from no movement, no sound, no nothing, instantly to spinning. It was amazingly fast how fast this thing was going. Spinning right in place in a circle. There was no wind generated from it. It was spinning incredibly fast. As I was looking at the ring and it's spinning, I remember seeing a white pinpoint of light developing right in the center of the ring, right where I was looking. Not in the center space, but in the center of the body of the ring. So if I was looking at the body of the ring itself spinning, right in the middle of that body developed this pinpoint of brilliant white light. As I stared at it, it got larger and larger, and then in an instant it exploded and just enveloped my eyesight. I relate it to like reverse tunnel vision. When you have tunnel vision, everything goes from the outside in. Well, this went from the inside out and enveloped my vision. When it exploded into my sight, it knocked me unconscious. I woke up, I would guess, 10 hours later. The sun was down. It was night. My watch had stopped, so I can't give you an accurate time. I still have the stopwatch. I was laying on the ground on my back, and I remember feeling very disoriented when I woke up, almost to the point of not remembering what happened. The weirdest thing about it was that the soles of my boots had been melted. The rubber on the soles of the boots, it was melted. There was grass in it. It was horrible. There were 2 footprints in the snow where my feet had been, and in those footprints, there was no snow. There was just grass underneath where I'd been standing. Obviously, the melting of the boot soles would burn me through the snow into the grass, but there were no burn marks on the ground. It was almost like I'd been struck by lightning. I felt very disoriented. My body hurt all over. I couldn't think very well. I was lost, actually. I couldn't figure out where I was. I sat there for half an hour, 45 minutes, just trying to figure out who I was, where I was, and what I was doing. It was very, very frightening.
Did you get any sense of communication in your mind from this object when it was spinning and when that light began to appear?
The only thing I felt when it started spinning was just pure hatred. I got this overwhelming feeling of, I hate you. Like, why are you here? Like, leave me alone. Why are you alive? That kind of thing. I come from a military family, and I've seen a lot of military hardware that performs very well, but I've never seen any piece of metallic hardware perform that kind of a maneuver in our atmosphere.
Spinning so rapidly and not causing any movement in the air around you.
Or any sound. Try to imagine seeing a ring spinning, right, in air with the antennas attached, but absolutely no air movement, absolutely no sound from air movement, no whoosh, no ka-whoosh, nothing, just complete silence.
And was it during that spinning that you had this sense that it was directing hatred at you?
When it started spinning like that, I genuinely believe it wanted my death.
And if it were that powerful, and from someplace else in the universe perhaps, why do you think you were not killed?
I don't think it had the capability. Using everything that I know to be valid in the world of physics and the world of chemistry as we know it, I don't think it had the capability to do it.
But that it was expressing to your mind somehow that it wanted you eliminated.
Exactly. I feel that it was expressing its emotions, if I dare use the word emotion. I don't know where it was from, of course. I definitely do not believe that it was man-made. There's a lot of stuff out there I know that can be man-made, but this was not. This was completely otherworldly. And I do not believe that it had the capability to kill me. What it was doing was expressing its desire to do so.
And when that white, bright pinpoint of light began to expand, did you have any other sense coming from the spinning object?
It was almost as though I was in a trance. My vision had been locked upon it. I do remember thinking I'm going to die. I remember thinking that this is it. I'm toast. Like, I'm done. I believe it tried to kill me and it failed somehow. It didn't perform something right or do something correctly. Or it was just a defensive tactic. Or it was an object that was sent here. What I got from looking at it, from stumbling upon it in the middle of nowhere, was that it was on some sort of covert operation. My main objective is to not be discovered. That's what I get from the whole situation, is that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I stumbled upon the wrong thing at the wrong time.
And you could say from what you observed that its mission at that time was to gather the snow in a melted form into that energy column and take it somewhere into that ring?
Yes. I thoroughly believe that it was studying something, whether it be the snow or whether the snow was just the top layer and it was trying to get to the dirt. Maybe there's something buried under there. I don't know. I've never gone back. I refuse to go back. I will not go back into that area. That's how frightening this was. I'm scared thinking about it right now.
And when you heard my discussion and heard Brent Yarrow up in Camas, Washington, describing what he and his friend had seen, what was your reaction?
To tell you the truth, and I'm not afraid to admit this, I broke down crying. I was very glad to hear that I wasn't the only one that had heard about this stuff. I wasn't the only one that had seen one of these things. I'm very, very scared of it coming back. I feel that its purpose was not good in nature. Something big is going to happen. I'm fairly certain of that.
Thanks for listening to this Earthfiles podcast, from the edges of science, environment, and real X-Files. Go to www.earthfiles.com to see more than 1,000 Earthfiles reports with photographs, drawings, and documents. And visit Earthfiles every day, every week, for new reports and new podcasts. That's www.earthfiles.com.